My name is Professor Jamie Jones, and I would like to tell you about not only the Civil War, but also how it impacted Belle Meade, one of the largest plantations in Nashville, Tennessee. The American Civil War was fought from 1861 to 1865. This war was between the northern states and the southern states. Follow me to our first stop. As I was saying before, the Civil War was fought between the North and the South. The cause of the Civil War can be explained in three main sections. The first section is the North and South fought over the ownership of slaves. The North was fighting for the freedom of slavery, as the South was pro-slavery and wanted to keep the workforce as is. The second section was to have states' rights. The third section was the opinion of westward expansion. It was due to the points that three events happened to finally have the war break out. In 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which would open new territories to slavery by asserting the rule of popular sovereignty. Due to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, the Bleeding Kansas Battle occurred in 1859. Out of this battle, the Republican Party was born, which made a lot of Southerners very upset. After the party was created in 1854, the Supreme Court had the Dred Scott case in 1857 that would create another problem. If this wasn't bad enough, there was an election in 1860. Abraham Lincoln became our 16th president in 1861. The 1860 election was the last straw for the Southerners, and due to the election, 7 states would pull away from the Union. When these states pulled away, they were known as the Confederate States of America. After the original 7 states left, there would be 4 more states that would follow. April 12, 1861 was the day that everything changed and paved the way for the next 4 years. The Civil War had begun. On April 12, 1861, the Union forces were attacked by the Confederate Army. This battle lasted over 34 hours until the Union Army would eventually surrender. This battle ended on April 14, 1861. In the following days to come, no one knew how many soldiers would be lost, liberties taken, and lives changed. Now back on the Belle Meade farm, William Giles Harding would take control and would own 3,500 acres and 136 enslaved workers. During this time, Harding created the Harding Light Artillery, which was one of the first Civil War companies organized in Tennessee. As the fighting continued on February 25, 1862, Nashville was captured, which caused the Confederate forces to abandon Middle Tennessee. Due to Harding not taking the oath of allegiance to the Union, he was arrested and was sent to Michigan from April 2nd to September 25, 1862. His wife Elizabeth McGavick wrote many letters asking for his freedom to be granted, but they were all denied. When he was able to return to Belle Meade, he was placed under house arrest until the war was over. Throughout 1862, the Hardings began to have issues with soldiers foraging through their food and supplies. This issue continued into 1863, when William Giles Harding came home and he asked Andrew Johnson for protection. There were 2 Union soldiers sent to guard Belle Meade, and that seemed to help the problem. January 1863 was the turning point of the Civil War. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln came out with the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation stated that all slaves in the 10 rebellious states were now free. You can imagine that this would upset many parties involved. President Lincoln wasn't liked from the beginning, but this action made him even more unliked by the South. Due to this new order, most of the Southern plantation owners didn't tell their slaves until a Union soldier would come to the community and tell them. The slaves would be freed to go to the Union side or men to join the Union Federal Army. If the plantation owner was kind, they would also offer the freed slave to continue to work for them, but they would have a better living arrangement and receive payment. There were many slaves that took advantage of the second option, since most of them were born on the farm that they were working on. When we look at the Civil War, we mainly think and talk about the men who fought in the battles, but rarely we think about the women. Yes, men played a large role in the Civil War, but let's look at what the women did on the home front. The women played a huge role during the Civil War. While the men were off fighting, the women were left to fill the shoes of their sons, husbands, and fathers. Back in those days, women were looked as the weaker out of the two. The labor that the men used to take care of became the women's livelihood. This war would change the thought process of women and allow them to have more opportunities in the future. Even after the war, the women would keep up the professions of nurses and teachers. It was due to the women's newfound interest in helping the community that they began to lead charitable organizations, which led to the women's suffrage movement in the early 20th century. Even though they were keeping themselves busy, there was still sadness from the separation of their loved ones. Miss Elizabeth McGavick Harding wanted to help, so she joined the Soldiers' Friends Society in Nashville, which was founded in April 1861. Due to Miss McGavick Harding's long hours helping the society, she was named the vice president. Not only were women helping at home, but some were helping closer to the front lines. Some of them would be nurses and help with countless surgeries. The ending total of women that were nurses were around 3,000. This was brave, but there were also around 400 women that disguised themselves as men to fight in the battles. The role of women in the Civil War was a large part of some of the freedoms that women have today. Let me go over a battle that brought the war to Belle Meade's doorstep. The Battle of Franklin was on the McGavick property. Why is this so important, you may ask? Well, this was the childhood home of Elizabeth McGavick, who was married to William Giles Harding in 1840. Elizabeth's brother, John McGavick, and his wife, Carrie, were there the night of the battle, which was on November 30th, 1864. Carrington was quickly turned into the largest field hospital in the area after the battle. There were many deaths just in the first night. The McGavick family was kind enough to set aside 2 acres of their property for the Confederate soldiers that lost their lives in the Battle of Franklin. Now, unfortunately, the fight didn't stop there. The Battle of Franklin was a victory for the Union Army, which made General John Bell Hood, general for the Confederates, move towards Belle Meade in the Nashville area. The events that followed the Franklin battle were just the beginning of stress and tears at Belle Meade. Once the Battle of Franklin was complete, General John Bell Hood started for Nashville. One of his generals, James Chalmers, took residence at Belle Meade leading up and during the Battle of Nashville. The Battle of Nashville took place on December 15th through the 16th, 1864. On the morning of December 15th, General George Thomas sent a force under General James Steedman against the Confederates' right flank. The Union troops overran the Confederate trenches and drove the rebels back more than a mile. December 15th came and went rather quickly, but General Thomas decided to strike again on the 16th. On December 16th, the Union Army struck harder, making the Confederate line give way, which sent Hood's men running towards Mississippi. Although Belle Meade suffered greatly during the Civil War, the mansion and farm were still intact and had not been confiscated. None of the immediate family were killed or injured during the war. William Giles Harding was named an honorary general in the Confederate Army and was referred to as General Harding the rest of his life. Now follow me to the end of the war. Now I am sure you are wondering how the Civil War ended. Well, let me tell you. Once the Battle of Nashville had happened, the battles in Tennessee were over. Through much bloodshed, toil, and tears, April 9, 1865, General Lee surrendered to General Ulysses Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse. This was a huge Union victory, but not the end as of yet. This surrender ended the war in Virginia. President Andrew Johnson would not announce the Civil War's end until August 20, 1866, which was 16 months after the surrender in Virginia. While Lee surrendered in Virginia, several other Confederate commanders continued to negotiate paroles and had minor battles. The Union soldiers were ordered to refrain from taunting the Confederate soldiers. The Grant-Lee Agreement would not only tell that the South had lost the war, but also pave the way of future surrenders. This war is counted as the bloodiest battle in American history. The number of casualties in total was around 620,000. The end of the war changed a lot for the South and Belle Meade. Unfortunately, in September of 1865, John Harding passed away at the age of 87. With the war over, the South and North had to get used to a new normal. After the Civil War was over, the United States had to recover and went through Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. This rebuilding process was something that no one was used to, due to the fact that there were 4 million new citizens in the United States, since many slaves were now free. Radical Reconstruction began all because of the Reconstruction Act of 1867. In this, it allowed newly freed slaves to gain a voice in the government for the first time in America's history. During Reconstruction, the Republicans represented a coalition of black people along with carpetbaggers and scallywags, as white Republicans from the North and the South. In early 1866, Congress passed the Freedmen's Bureau, and the Civil Rights Bill was sent to President Johnson for approval. President Johnson would veto these bills, and that would culminate into his impeachment in 1868. Now, in the following March, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which would temporarily divide the South into 5 military districts and outline how governments would be organized. Congress would also ratify the 14th Amendment, which grants equal protection for all people. In 1869, Congress also approved the 15th Amendment, which says that citizens would not be denied the right to vote, quote, on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, end quote. Now, by the time 1870 rolled around, all of the former Confederate states had been allowed to come back to the Union. There were a lot of achievements that came out of the Reconstruction era, but I would like to specifically talk about 4 of them. The first achievement was the fact that the South would be the first to create a state-funded public school. The second achievement was to allow for more of an equitable taxation legislation. The third achievement was they made law against racial discrimination in public transport. The final achievement was they were able to develop ambitious economic development programs. The Compromise of 1877 marked the end of Reconstruction, which was an agreement between the Southern Democrats and Allied Republicans to settle the result of the 1876 election, which was won by Rutherford B. Hayes, who was a Republican. Due to the Republican victory, the Democrats were not happy. They made an argument with the Republicans that they would not block Hayes' victory if they removed all federal troops from the South. The compromise went into full effect once the Union soldiers were removed from Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina. This final act put an end to Reconstruction. I'm afraid that our time together is up, but I hope that you have learned that Belle Meade played a huge role in Civil War history. The Battle of Franklin and the Battle of Nashville directly impacted and influenced daily living then and continues to chart the direction economically, financially, and allowing all persons to have freedoms and opportunities.